Welcome, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the Sales Hacker Guide to the Galaxy crash course of New Normal of Sales. And today we'll have Derek Wyszynski presenting for us, but before we get started, just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items. We will be taking questions throughout the session today, so at any point in time, if you have a question, feel free to type it into the questions pane of the GoToWebinar side panel. You can locate the questions pane at the bottom of your menu. There's a questions area. You can simply type your question in, and we will address your question as quickly as we can. Also, we are recording today's session, so everyone attending today will get a copy of the recording following the live session today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Derek.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for joining today, the Sales Hacker Guide to the Galaxy crash course. Throughout the course of the last 6 webinars, we've had a lot of questions, a lot of interest, a lot of feedback. But one of the questions was, Derek, we really like a lot of this content that you're giving, but is there one single thing of this webinar that I should take with me in order to go ahead and kind of execute some of the things that you're talking about? So what we did here is, in this crash course, we've distilled each one of those 6 webinars to a single point, which we'll talk about, we'll extrapolate on, and we'll communicate. And then we'll move on and we'll kind of build the whole structure of the previous webinars. We will at the end provide a link to all of the webinar content, not only this one, but all the previous 6 webinars. So if you want to go ahead and expand your knowledge, if you have not taken some of the previous webinars, or this is your first interaction with our Sales Hacker Guide to the Galaxy, that would be fantastic. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go briefly over what we're going to cover. So the agenda for our presentation is this. We're going to first cover some of the information, the one thing that you need to take away from our initial Sales Hacker Guide to the Galaxy webinar, Prospecting in the New Normal, which was the title. It was talking about how salespeople prospect in 2016, 2017 in the world we find ourselves in today. The next webinar was about social media and how to use social media not just as a branding exercise, but also as an opportunity engine. Then we're going to go into prospecting emails that click. Some real, the one thing you need to take away, the real information you need in order to create an email, outbound email, that people are going to access, they're going to look at, they're going to interact with you on. Then we're going to branch into something I call story selling, which is the use of storytelling in sales in order to convey emotion and convey a message to get people engaged with you. We're also going to talk about sales to smarketing, how modern salespeople are having to become much more like marketers in order to communicate with their prospective clients. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at customer experience, how to insert customer experience in everything you do, and why you should be doing that every day, because it's incredibly important. And we're going to talk about why it's important. But the very first thing we're going to do is talk about prospecting in the new normal. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the new normal, what I identify the new normal is the world we live in, we find ourselves living in right now. And in the world we live in, the world that we are accessing via our phones and our emails and our social media, the number one sales challenge I find, and I talk to hundreds of salespeople every month, the number one challenge is literally the ability to build a pipeline. The ability to build a valid pipeline of business that you can carry through the course of a quarter, a half, or a year. Now, right now, the average SDR or BDR is making about 52 prospecting calls a day. The average salesperson sends about 200 prospecting emails a week. This is outbound prospecting that's going out there into the world to trying to bring people in to have a conversation with us about the stuff and the things and the widgets that we're selling. But the brutal truth that I've identified through that is literally 80% of buyers don't even pick up the phone anymore. So you've got a 2 in 10 chance of actually connecting to someone, and as we go forward, you'll see what that 2 in 10 chance really means to your pipeline and to your forecast. But also, you know, email is not much better. Sales emails, less than a quarter of them are actually opened by buyers at any one period of time. Well, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And I believe it's because the customer has evolved. They've evolved to the point in which that they are creating an ecosystem for themselves where they can manage the majority of their relationships with vendors without talking to a human being. And we've seen that expound in the B2C world, in the business to customer world. I don't know anybody that buys anything, electronics or otherwise, that doesn't search for it on Amazon. I don't know anyone that picks up everything, throws the kids and everybody into the car and drives over to a store to do research or to look at something, at a piece of furniture, or at a large purchase, air conditioning unit or something else like that. All of that stuff we're doing. Even people that buy cars and houses, we all buy cars and houses. We're doing the majority of that research, that looking out for what we're looking for online and through different channels. In the old days, we used to call a real estate agent, and they'd show us all the listings, and they'd give us all the listings, and then we'd go out and visit the homes and do all these other things. In the old days, we used to go to the car dealership, and the salesperson would come out and they'd show us the car, they'd kick the tires. All of that has changed in our B2C world. And if you think of houses and cars are probably two of the largest purchases you'll make as an individual in your lifetime. And if you've basically outsourced a lot of that process to an automated, a self-service process, why would you then do all of that at home and then walk over to your job and have to deal with salespeople to buy stuff and things for your business? So there's a disconnect, and this is what's going on in the B2C world, and it's not only bleeding over, it is the canary in the coal mine for what's going on in the B2B world. And so when we did this original webinar, there was one question and one thing that I thought was the most important thing about it, and that is, it doesn't matter the channel that you're communicating on. Vis-a-vis, it doesn't matter if it's a phone call, if you're knocking on doors, what we used to call in-person call, an IPC when I was at Xerox. It doesn't matter if it's email, if you're printing stuff out and sending it in snail mail, if it's social. It doesn't matter the channel that you're communicating. The most important thing is what you're communicating and the content. So the one thing from the prospecting in the new webinar that you need to take to heart, I believe, is the fact that what you say is much more important than how you say it or through what medium you say it. And you have to concentrate on content that is deliverable through all channels and through omni-channels, because we're going to talk a little bit about that later, about the multitude of channels and what that means. But for prospecting, I think the one thing you have to take away is the content, the pitch, whatever it is, that it needs to provide intrinsic value into itself before you can expect it to do anything or help you at all in your prospecting. So that's the one thing for prospecting in the new normal. Now, of course, at the end of the webinar, you'll have a link to that. You'll have a link given to you for this entire webinar, and this was a 60-minute webinar where we really delved deep into prospecting, so you can take a look at that. But that's the one thing I believe that we need to take. Social media turning into an opportunity engine. So first things first, we're all salespeople. We all have LinkedIn profiles, and if you look at LinkedIn, people have stuff about, the years they made quota. I was a quota buster at Xerox. I had in my profile every year that I made quota, all my President Club awards, the kind of deals I did, the customers I had, how many millions of dollars of business I sold for Xerox. I even actually had, sometimes I would post pictures of myself with my Salesperson of the Year award that I would get. In 2017, here's a picture of every one of your prospects that cares about any of that in your LinkedIn profile. Our LinkedIn profiles as salespeople aren't resumes. They're the first interaction our customers have to us outside of email or phone or however we reach to them. Just ask yourself, the last time you got an email or a phone call from a salesperson from a company, didn't you go to LinkedIn to check them out? I know I did. And I'll tell you this, if I have somebody emailing me trying to say, I understand you and all about your business, and why don't you talk to me for 15 minutes so I can tell you how I can help. And I go to their LinkedIn profile, and it's all about how much money this guy or gal is making and how many President Club awards they've gotten. And it's all about them, them, them. I'm saying, well, I'm just another number to this guy. I'm just a notch on his belt. So even if the product or service is cool or it's something that I need, why would I interact with him? LinkedIn, as a salesperson, you cannot afford LinkedIn to be your resume. It is literally your first opportunity to make a customer-centric impression to your prospects. So if you take a look at whether it be Twitter or LinkedIn, there are a couple of different things you really have to look at when it comes to effective social media and social media profiles turning into a prospecting engine or an opportunity engine. The first of which is you have to follow people. Nobody likes the person standing on a box in the middle of town screaming in a megaphone. You have to have conversations, and the only way you have conversations is listening to other people. So you need to follow people, you need to be engaged in their conversations. Not only that, the people you follow may in turn follow you because your content is intriguing. Because remember the first part, we said content is king. Your brand in social media should be your brand, and by your brand I mean the individual salespeople on this phone, on this webinar. It should be your brand, not your business's brand. If you work for IBM, if you work for Xerox, if you work for Joe's Rib and Chicken Shack, it's your social media profile should be about you, not your company. Because at the end of the day, the relationship you have with customers is yours. That's the one you're trying to build. So you have to build a personal relationship, and you do that through your own branding. You also have to interact with OPC, I call it, other people's content. You have to find thought leaders and people out there that have amazing opinions or opinions that are controversial. Whatever it is, you have to go ahead and find other people's content, and you have to share it, you have to like it, you have to comment on it, you have to interact with it. And by interacting with other people's content, the people that read your comments and see what you're sharing thereby infer that you have an intriguing insight into what they're interested in as well. So OPC is incredibly important. Now, how does all this work? Well, once you engage in social media, whether it be Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever the case may be, and there's a great case to be made that Facebook is a fantastic business, a B2B engine for you. Once you interact with people, you take a look at individuals like Brett here, and they start making posts and making comments. And as you can see, Brett, who has nothing to do with sales, he is basically my ideal customer profile, someone that I would want to talk to. If you look at what he's talking about getting unsolicited contacts and all these voicemails and all these emails, and he's always interested in great insights, but he doesn't want to be cold called or cold emailed. This is someone who's going to be very interested in communicating to him the way he wants me to communicate to him. Also, throughout his comments and the comments other people leave, I literally, just by following Brett and looking at Gray and looking at Eric, I literally have 3 people I know that are my ideal customer profile that are espousing beliefs completely unsolicited by myself, but are espousing beliefs that I think would be valuable and that I could expound upon to get them to talk about ZynBit, about what I sell. So Brett, Gray, and Eric have now become prospects for me, and prospects open up opportunities. So simply by using social media as a way to have a conversation and engage in conversations, I could almost throw out any cold lead list I have or list of people that are CIOs and just follow a bunch of CIOs and see what they're talking about and engage with them that way. So the one thing I have to remember for social media is actually 3 things, but it's all one thing, and it all it all concentrates on the rebuilding of your social media profile. Your social media profile, whether it be Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, is not for cat videos, and it's not your resume. It's the first conversation you have with prospects. You have to spend less time connecting with other salespeople and more time connecting with your customers, because unless you're selling to salespeople, and that's fine. But if you're selling to CIOs, or if you're selling to accounting managers, or if you're selling to payroll clerks or something else to that effect, why are you connected to Aunt Mary? Why are you connected to people you went to high school with in social media? They have nothing to offer you as far as their networks. Remember, every time you like, comment, or post something on social media, not only do your connections see it, but the connections of your connections see it. So if I'm selling to accounting managers, and if I'm connected to accounting managers, when that accounting manager comments, likes, or shares my content on social media, they are sharing it with their network, who are mostly other accounting managers or people that they know within their industry. So I can exponentially increase my audience just by connecting with my customers. And again, back to the first, it's content, content, content. Being able to create long form, short form, and liking other people's content, that OPC. So that's really the one thing you have to take away from this. There is much more, and you can delve into this, into the social media prospecting engine webinar that we'll give you a link to at the end of this webinar. So prospecting emails that click. Well, Derek, this is all well and good, but I have to send emails as part of my job. Well, I know you do, because email is still, for all its faults, is still the optimal and primary method of communication, because we live in a global community. A phone doesn't help me right now talk to a client in Australia, because they're all asleep. And actually it's tomorrow morning already over there. So they're all asleep, or it's the middle of the night. So a phone call, a webinar, that doesn't help me. What helps me is the ability to send them an email all the way there in Australia, and they'll be able to read it at their leisure when they wake up, and then communicate with me that way. There are all of these users out there that are mobile users utilize email as the primary mode of communication. So email remains the go-to form of communication. With that being said, there's a lot of quote-unquote, and I'm doing air quotes here, you can't see me, but there's a lot of quote-unquote advice about how to send emails for email prospecting. And there's a lot of stuff. It's, you grab them with something funny, your subject line, it has to be important, or it has to be mysterious, so they open it not knowing if it's from a customer or a salesperson. The length of your email has to be super short, and you have to ask for a meeting. Well, when you follow that advice, you get emails like this. And the problem with emails like this is they go right in the can. They go right in the can, and I know they go right in the can because I throw them right in the can. They go right in the junk. I don't even look at or read any of these emails, and neither do your customers as well. So if you're sending emails like this and you're wondering why you're not getting the interaction because you're following all the rules, I think you have to question or not whether the rules are something you should be following. When it comes right down to it, the brutal truth about buyers, or why we're failing at email prospecting, is very simple. We think our customers have a problem we can solve, and we believe we can help our prospects, and we think if they only would talk to us, if they only would give us the time, they'd fall in love with us. I don't know about you, to me that sounds a lot like stalking. That sounds a lot like someone who's thinking about someone who believes that they care about that person, and believes if they would only interact and talk with them, I could show them that I'm important and they need me. It's kind of creepy, and it's what we've been doing for years, and this is why it's failing, because right now customers don't want it to be about us. They want it to be about them. It's not about what we care about, what we want to talk to them about, or the problems we think they have. It's about them. Literally 95% of your total addressable market, whatever you're selling, doesn't matter if it's software, hardware, underwear, it doesn't matter what you're selling, 95% of your customer base isn't in a buying cycle right now, which means they don't know they have a problem, or if they do, they don't think it's a priority, and they don't care about you. And our job as salespeople is to change that. And the way we change it, I think, is by looking at the anatomy of a real good prospecting email. And this kind of prospecting email is something that it's a prospecting email with a brain. It provides you market insights. It doesn't have to be the latest Gartner numbers. It can be something that you know, something that you've run across in your professional life. It's personalized content, and not personalized just using the name or using the fact that somebody went to Caltech or Wayne State University in their LinkedIn profile. Personalized content in the essence of it's something about them, about something they've done recently that they do at their job, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the one thing we get to. It's also about content links, not attachments, but links to information and data and insight and stories that you want to provide. And there's a reason that it's links and not attachments, and I'll go into that in the next part of the anatomy. Proof source, again, proof source, links, commentaries, reviews. These are the types of things that people want to take a look at. Everybody goes to Amazon for the reviews. Ask your friend that's sitting next to you, hey, let's go to lunch. There's this new Mongolian place over on Main Street. Give them the name of the place, and they will invariably get on their phone and look at Yelp. Even if you tell them it's the best Mongolian you've ever had and they've known you for 15 years, they are going to go online and check the Yelp review. That's how important proof sources are to us in our daily lives, so we need to use them in our business lives. Social presence. Your customers, when you send an email, should be able to do a 1 or 2 click and find your LinkedIn, your Twitter, your Instagram, your Facebook, MySpace, whatever you're using. It's like they need to be able to find it. They need to be able to see you're on it. So you see how important your social media profile is? The last thing you want if someone clicks your LinkedIn is to see a bunch of awards about how you were 150% of quota last year because you, in their minds, overcharge customers for the products. Because that's what a customer thinks when they see a salesperson making double or triple their quota. They think of somebody that's overcharging their customers. Interaction tracking. All of this doesn't matter. None of this email matters if you can't track whether or not someone has read your email, they've clicked your link, or they've done anything like that. Have they looked at your website? Have they looked at your content? If you don't know any of that, you're just throwing darts in the wind trying to figure something out. Now, what is a healthy anatomy of a good prospecting email not have? It doesn't have an ask for a meeting in it. I cannot stress this enough. I personally don't think there's anything worse in business than getting an email from someone and then them asking for 15 minutes or 20 minutes of my time without having offered me anything first. It is, they go right into the trash can, and I know for a fact that all of my customers, and the majority of them, these emails go right into the trash can. There's really no reason to ask for a meeting if I haven't proven there's a need for it. And you can't, I don't care what the books tell you, the sales trainers, I don't sell sales training, so I can't speak for them, but I can tell you this, is that it is incredibly difficult to get somebody to agree to a meeting in a 4-minute phone call or a 300-word email. And the fact of the matter is that the quality of people that go to those meetings or the quality of those meetings is evident in the fact that 50% of reps don't make their quota today in all verticals, regardless. So everybody's got leads, everybody's answering the leads, and if you've ever said this from getting an MQL from marketing, a marketing lead, this wasn't really a lead. If anybody's ever said that, this is the reason why, is because somebody asked for a meeting before there was proper proof necessary to have a meeting, before you knew that the conversation had proceeded to the point. If you meet someone in a bar and you start smiling at each other, buying people drinks, the first question out of your mouth isn't, let's get married. It isn't. You don't jump to the end just at the very beginning. You have to warm up the conversation. You have to feel each other out. You have to progress through that, through a natural process. That's the way we live in our day-to-day lives. It boggles my mind to think why we kind of jumpstart that or try to go ahead and short-circuit that in our business lives. So the one thing to remember when you're dealing with these email prospecting is you have to make it personal. You have to pull the information. There's a way to construct an email that is going to garner you information, and it is by looking at what your customers or prospects are interested in. So here's an example. Here's Jean Williams. She's there's her LinkedIn profile, and she's an HR director, and she wrote an article, Why Great Employees Quit. So rather than sending her one of those junk emails we saw in the beginning, and Graham Hawkins in his book, The Future Sales Profession, talks about using those outdated techniques and why people do it. Rather than do that, it would behoove me to spend 5 minutes reading her article and then constructing an email that's similar to this. And it's similar to this because it's personalized content. Jean, I read your article on LinkedIn, and I found myself working in organizations like that. Hey, we work with HR directors, and we have a free webinar that's going on talking about employee retention in 2017. If there's any interest, you can register. Hey, no big sales pitch. I'm at ZynBit. Here are our proof sources. Here's a work environment great employees thrive. There's a proof source demonstration. There's an HR reviews, a magazine, a cover story on ZynBit. There's all our customer reviews. And then here's all my social media links. Here's where she can go back. This is a singular email that is customized, that meets all of that criteria, and it's done from a personalized aspect. So the one thing I would say for this particular part of this webinar and this crash course is to construct emails that you can track. And what I mean by that is when I send this email, all of those green hyperlinks that you see, because those are hyperlinks, those are all trackable. We use ZynBit for that software, but they're all trackable. They're capable of seeing everything. I can see what she's clicked, if she's opened it, where she's been. I can see her interest, regardless of the fact whether she responds to my email or not. And if she doesn't respond to my email, but approaches the webinar and goes to the webinar, my next thing out of my mouth isn't, let's have a meeting so I can sell you something. I'm creating a conversation and a relationship so we can move forward. So maybe 6 months from now or 6 days from now, whatever that time frame is, she'll feel comfortable enough to have a meeting, and we can have a meeting about her needs and her organization's needs, not needs about, or not a meeting about my need to make my quota for this month. So the next part is story selling, and I call it story selling. It's storytelling for sales. And when you think of story, a lot of people think of just like going to the library or the bookstore, picking up a book, opening and reading stories. But if you think about it, story is really everywhere in our modern world. Yeah, it's in books and periodicals, but it's also in blogs. Streaming media has increased the level of stories and the number of stories and the quality of stories. I mean, I grew up on TV in the 1970s. You couldn't see a Breaking Bad of a level or a Walking Dead or shows of that quality on TV in the 70s. Now they're at your fingertips. The level of drama and quality and comedy and capability for story is amazed. Social media and marketing also tell stories. So everywhere we look, we see story. Why? Well, because that's how our brain is wired. Mike Bosworth, you may recognize him. He is the father of a little thing called solution selling, which only happens to be the most successful selling program ever in the history of the planet Earth. He created solution selling and customer-centric selling, and millions of people have taken the courses. Billion-dollar businesses make it a part of their training, salespeople to this day. Mike determined after 20 years of pushing solution selling, he realized that 80% of the people taking his training were getting little or no benefit from it. And he wasn't happy. He had put his life into this. And what he determined was the salespeople that succeeded in solution selling already were doing something that the other 80% weren't. And that 80% were telling, or that 20% were telling stories. They were communicating in a story format, and they were able to communicate to customers, to prospects, to suspects in that way. So he has now restructured his entire training regimen, and he's focused for the last 4 or 5 years specifically on storytelling. So if that doesn't convince you that the leader in sales training is talking about storytelling, let's talk about, something we all have, hopefully, which is a brain and the science of story. So storytelling is hard-coded in our brains as human beings. The very first part of it is that there's this chemical called cortisol, and it's hardwired in our brain. This thing, it makes us focus on the bad, threatening, or dangerous things in life. If you've ever walked down a dark alley, if you've ever went down to the basement when the light was out, if you've ever had the hair stick up on the back of your neck in a situation, the reason that is because we tend in our human psyche to focus on the bad things. Everybody thinks the glass is half empty most of the time, and that's just the way it is. And because we're hardwired to fight or flight. It's one of the things that evolution has provided us so we can survive in the world and not get eaten by bears. But the next thing, this neuropeptide here, is all about character interaction. So when you're close to a person, when you're talking to that boy or girl at the bar or at the harvest dance, or you're interacting with your family members, your coworkers, this neuropeptide is released when you feel physically and emotionally close to those people. There's also something called mirror neurons, and these are brain cells that fire when we observe someone else performing the same action. I'm a long-distance runner, so when I watch movies where people are running, like an old movie like Chariots of Fire, or movies about the Olympics or something else, when I see that long-distance runner running and hitting the fourth mile of a marathon, or they're crossing the finish line, I know what that feels like. And what's happening in my brain is these neurons are firing because I've actually crossed the finish line. I've finished a marathon. I've done these things. So performing the same action makes me feel that way. And all of this together, when all of these things are working together, it develops into something called transportation, which means the cortisol, this neuropeptide, the neurons all get together and they transport us to feeling like we're in the part of it. That's why good movies, good books, good television shows, you forget yourself, you forget it's Brad Pitt on the screen, and you're immersed in the story. There's a very technical term for what these stories emote in us, and they're simply called emotions. Good storytelling pulls the emotions out of people, and it makes them part and parcel of the story that you're telling. What is not story is raw data. And I say this as an organization, we believe, we even have a hashtag, Win with Data, here at ZynBit. We believe in data, but data isn't the story. Data is the means to tell the story. Quite honestly, when it comes down to it, if you were selling skateboards, no one other than another skateboard manufacturer wants to know about this. They don't want to know about any of this. Maybe 1-2% of your customer base, if you're selling skateboards, want to know about this. What the skateboard people want to know about is this, the story of what it feels like to be on a skateboard, what it feels like, the emotion that one would get by choosing our skateboard over somebody else's. So rather than talk about the data, you have to talk about the story behind the data. The one thing when it comes to story selling is that any story you craft or tell must be multi-channel, meaning that the story you craft or tell needs to be able to be communicated via phone, email, meetings, demos, social, elevator pitch, carrier pigeon, smoke signal, whatever you're using. Yet story needs to be crafted in a way where it could be shared over multiple channels, because you as a salesperson no longer have the ability to choose the method of communication your customer wants to have. Like I said, in the old days, the customer needed to pick up the phone because there was nothing as like caller ID, so they didn't know if it was their boss calling or a stinky salesperson. Now they know, and so they don't pick up the phone. They usually don't pick up the phone for their boss either, but they definitely don't pick up the phone for any salesperson or out-of-state number or 800 number or anything else like that they're answering. You can't make them read your email. No matter, that would be a great application. If I could build that app, I'd make billions of dollars that would force people to read your email. So the customer is going to choose the channel they want to communicate to you. So if you craft a good story that creates those emotions, you need to be able to communicate it in multiple ways. And when you take the full story selling webinar, we talk a little bit about that, about how to craft those types of stories. I call them micro stories, and you can take a look at how we go ahead and do that. Sales to Smarketer. Okay, so Derek, what's Smarketing? Well, Smarketing is a term that's become all the rage, which is really just an amalgam of sales and marketing. Sales has always been one-to-one. Marketing has always been one-to-many. But we find ourselves in the world of sales being at the forefront of speaking to many at once. We need to be able to be Smarketers. We have to have a brain of a salesperson, but we have to have the mouth of a marketer. And how do we go ahead and do that? Well, why is it so important that we do that? Well, let's talk about the changing landscape of things. There are about 1,100 malls in the United States. This year alone, over 300 of these are going to close by the end of the decade. And all of the stores within these malls, 21 retailers have announced this year alone that over 3,500 stores are going to close across the country. So you have to think about how this matches with what's going on in B2B. All of these products, all of these stores, all of this, they had salespeople. They had salespeople that sat there and sold these products. These retailers aren't not selling product. They're selling product. They're selling it through a different channel. Most of them are. Either most of them are selling or they're going to go out of business. But the sheer fact is, just because they're not in the mall doesn't mean they're not selling things. They're relying on a one-to-many communication. They're relying on marketing and an engine, an e-commerce engine, to go ahead and sell these things. And all of those wonderful salespeople that had jobs at all those companies that you see on the right hand or on the left hand side, they're all gone. They all go somewhere else. And really, you know, no one is tearing up about it. And let's be honest about that. No one is tearing up about it because I like buying stuff from Amazon rather than driving down to Circuit City. Circuit City doesn't exist anymore, and I didn't have a funeral for him. And I don't know if you did. Did anyone on the phone go to the wake for Blockbuster? Or do you sit there with Netflix and Hulu and all your great streaming services and just bask in the entertainment value of your $9.99 or $11.99 per month that you're paying? We all do that. None of us miss the people that we used to have to deal with. And if we're honest with ourselves, unless we change the way we do things, no one is going to miss us once our jobs are gone. So if we think about that, and we think about what's happened in retail, we have to look at what's happened in retail is, again, that canary in the coal mine of what's going to happen in B2B and what's happening in B2B. Because, and this is in B2B, this quote is about from McKinsey & Company regarding B2B models. A disruptive new sales model is emerging. Digitally enabled enterprise sales is more closely resembling B2C e-commerce, where large enterprise customers can research, test, and start paying for products without stepping away from their computer. This is why every piece of software you want to buy out there in the world has a free trial, has self-guided demos. All of the things we as salespeople used to go ahead and do, now we have access to. This is why when you go to Zillow.com or when you go to Redfin.com, they have a 360 view tour of the home that's for sale. They have 72 different pictures of everything there, of the home that's for sale. Because we used to rely on having a realtor take us out to those homes and view them. We don't have to anymore. This is the way B2C has worked, and this is the way B2B is moving, and we have to realize it. And either we can hold our hands out and we can close our eyes and we can get hit in the head, or we can embrace it and figure out ways to live within this new normal. And again, it's all driven from our customer, because our customer for years talked to salespeople like us for guidance, right? Because they were early in the sales process and they needed our help. But now, because of the technology that's available, they already know their problem. They know they need to solve it. They know the solutions are available, and they're pretty sure of the price they want to pay. So the reason they're not answering our phone calls or our emails isn't because what we're selling isn't interesting to them. It's the reality is they don't think they need us. And our job is to ask ourselves, how can we be needed? And this is across multiple verticals. When you look at traditional cold calls, and the traditional cold calls out there, they've done studies. Over 6,000 cold calls were made over a 2-day or a 2-week period at Baylor University. And what did they find? Well, they found that 17% were non-working numbers, over half weren't even answered. 28% that were answered, they didn't care, they just hung up. So 91% of the calls weren't even answered, or they were not interested, or they refused any information. And of that 9% that were answered and they were looking at a process with this, less than 0.5% were effectively sold. This is the world we live in as far as salespeople. Now, for those of you saying, well, that's just phone, I'm all email, I'm all web-generated leads. Well, that's not much of a better story. So don't count those chickens because they haven't hatched. Even with web-generated leads, even your website and your forms creating the leads for you, you've got less than a 10% success rate. In what other part of our lives is 10% an accurate measure of success? If you got up every morning and went out to your driveway and got into your car and turned the ignition, and it only worked 10% of the time, would you ever buy that type of car again? I think the answer is no, and I think we have to think to ourselves how we can effectively communicate better and not become so much sales, but get into the conversations with content and with interaction that we want to with our clients. And I think that's through what we're talking about, Smarketing. And the old way of doing things, you had a marketer and they would help wrangle prospects, and then they would be involved with a salesperson to go ahead and buy stuff and things. And that was the economic engine. That was the traditional sales and marketing way. Well, what happens when the customer says, I no longer need the salesperson? Because that's what they're saying. Well, the engine doesn't work. I don't know about you, but when there's 3 cogs and 1 cog isn't working, there's nothing going on. And so this is a prime example of why 50% of salespeople aren't at quota, they aren't making their numbers, is because the process is broken. Because the customers simply don't think they need that level of outreach. So if we take a look at the new way through Smarketing, is I truly believe that a person who's a Smarketer, someone who has got the brain of a salesperson but the mouth of a marketer, can go ahead and interact and work internally with their own customer success team and with prospects and create an engine for buying that is relative, that becomes make it easy for the customer, that communicates to the customer when they want to. I delve very, very deeply into Smarketing, in the Smarketing webinar, and how to merge your marketing and how to merge your sales together. And if you have the opportunity, again, you can take the link and you can look at that webinar. But the one thing that I thought was important for you to take away from this was to understand what a Smarketer is not. A Smarketer is not a closer. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that seller-focused selling isn't playing anymore. It's not playing with the customers in either a B2C or a B2B environment. Our own numbers, our own pipelines show that. The balance of power has tipped away from the sales rep and it's tipped toward the buyer. That pendulum isn't swinging back. There's so much transparency and availability for information out there that the ability to tap into those third-party reviews, buyers are much savvier than they used to be. Again, I use the example. Ask your friend out to lunch and see if they look at the Yelp review of that particular place. High-pressure selling has stopped working because it treats customers like interchangeable piles of money, which is exactly the reason why you don't put your President Club wins on your LinkedIn, because a customer looks at that and they think all they are is a conquest. They're not a partner, no matter what you say in your marketing. So a Smarketer is not a closer. Now, what is a closer? When you are a Smarketer, that's covered in the webinar, but this is definitely the one thing that I believe that you needed to take away from that. Lastly, CX in everything you do, customer experience. Why is customer experience so important? Well, spelling is actually important too, and I didn't spell everything correct, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But why is customer experience so important? Well, because we're in a new age. There was an age for about the first 60 years of the last century was the age of manufacturing, right? Companies were built to build products for customers. Then a couple years later, global connections made it incredibly advantageous for companies to go ahead and distribute their products. So companies like Walmart were able to be created. Toyota, we're selling cars in the United States. Companies like UPS were created. So these companies could transport stuff and things that we sold directly to our front door, or at least to our town. Next came information. The information companies that went ahead and connected the customer to their PCs to supply chains for manufactured products, right? So these companies, Amazon and Google, connected us to the Walmarts and Toyotas to get the products the Fords, the Boeings, and the GEs created, right? And they were all built upon each other. And this was working relatively well up until about 2010. It still works, but there's another part, there's a new age that's coming. It's the age of the customer. And the age of the customer has come around. It's no longer the sales process, it's the buyer's journey. The buyer is empowered. And we don't know who's going to be the leaders in these industries. This is relatively new. And the fact is many people are trying to figure out what the customer wants in the future. So let's talk about that. What does the customer want in the future? Those of us in IT, I think we know. In IT, $209 billion was spent on the cloud last year. This year, $250 billion will be spent. In 2020, almost $400 billion will be spent. A lot of that is on SaaS, and it's actually going to be much more on SaaS. I think the future of what the customer wants is anything as a service. I'm calling it XaaS, anything as a service. And if you look at your phone, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. You can take rides as a service, you can buy groceries as a service, you can get everything as a service. And this global economy is going to be growing almost 40% in the next couple of years. 40% it's going to be growing. So think about whatever that thing is that you sell. Can it be turned into a service? And if it can, your customer is going to want that, because things have drastically changed. Because back in the old days, we used to drive down to Main Street with our mom and dad and used to go to the general store to buy our stuff and things. And then the big box stores showed up. And then we no longer went down to Main Street. We went to the suburbs, and we pulled into a big parking lot, and we went to the big box store. Then we went ahead and said, why do we have to drive to the big box store? Let me just go to the website, and let me go ahead and go clickety-clack, and I can get that stuff and thing delivered to myself. And now we're in the subscription economy. We're actually subscribing and buying things as a service. We don't buy movies. We don't drive to a store to buy a laser disc anymore or a VHS tape. We don't drive to a store to rent tapes. We go ahead and purchase a service. We subscribe to a monthly service where we can look at all the movies we want. We do the same thing with car rides. I mean, it's like this is what's going on. And the fact of the matter is that this market is exploding and will continue to explode globally. So what does that mean to you and me, Mr. and Mrs. Regular salesperson? Well, in the olden days, before today, we used to deal with our customers this way. So there's salesperson on the bottom, customer on the top. We'd have a great handshake, we'd sign a contract, and they'd give us a bunch of money. And then for a part of that money would be ours because we'd get it in commission. And that was it. And then we'd go on to the next customer, because there was a wall built, and that wall, which the customer was on the other side of now, was dealing with service people, with technical people, implementation people, maybe even there was the hapless account manager that the account was transferred over to that would handle the upgrades and the upsell and everything else. But that was the model, right? And that was the model for years. The vast majority of revenue was at the front of the deal, and you were paid up front. But now we look at today. And then today, we deal with a customer that just wants to subscribe for a year or a month to whatever thing that we have, whatever offering we're providing. And the wall goes up, and now all of these people are responsible for the customer experience, the CX for this particular customer. Right here it's happening. And since CX lives there, that's where all the renewal money is. That's where the majority of the revenue, if you work in a subscription-based organization that's your offering, the vast majority of revenue is not in the initial sale process. That's peanuts. The majority of revenue in your organization is at the back end, in the renewals, in the upsells. And we as salespeople need to get ourselves over here. We need to figure out a way where we become part of the CX solution. And there's a valid reason for that, because you remember those malls, those malls that were when we're talking about Smarketing, when we're talking about companies that no longer have salespeople. Your companies, your organizations right now are investing millions of dollars in sales technology for AI self-service. The ability for the customer to deal with a bot, to deal with an e-commerce site, to deal with software, so they can get that initial subscription. Because once they get them in for the first month or the first quarter or the first year, they're going to let their customer experience engine churn and make those people lifelong customers to their particular organization or service. And if you're not in there, you're out. When it comes right down to it, modern sales is CX driven. Because at the initial sale, only 5 to 30% of the revenue from that customer is at the initial sale. The vast majority is after the initial sale. If you were an employer, if you owned a business, where would you spend the majority of your time, effort, and energy? Would it be on the 5% or would it be on the 95%? So what's the one thing we have to remember when it comes to CX? This is a net new prospecting cold call. Your sales leaders, your sales trainers talk about that. Talk about how to get people in. That's where you need to concentrate. You need to concentrate there. The problem is our customers are telling us that when we do talk to them, we may be knowledgeable about our company and our product, but for everything else, we stink. We don't know about our industry that we're selling to. We don't know what questions to ask. We don't know about our specific business. We don't know about our responsibilities, our customers' responsibilities. We don't know about the issues. We don't have relevant examples or case experiences. And why is that? Why don't we know this stuff, Derek? Because sales training tells nothing about your customer to you ever. Your sales training is never about your customer. If you ever had sales training that goes deep dive into your customer's psyche, into who your ideal customer profile is and how you communicate to them, my hat's off to you, because the vast majority of sales training out there has nothing to do with that. The only way you can turn all of these upside down is to interact with your current customers after they buy. You have an entire database of current customers right now. By talking with them, by dealing with them on a daily basis, you'll know the knowledge in their industry. You'll know what questions to ask. You'll know about their business. You'll know about their roles and responsibilities by dealing with them. That's why it's imperative for salespeople to engage themselves and to become part of CX, and to infuse CX in every part of there's no other way for us to survive other than that. Because the fact of the matter is, we are failing miserably at everything else. So we have to change, or people are going to change it for us. And they're just going to automate the front end. They're going to bring people in through an e-commerce engine, and they're going to spend a lot of time, effort, and energy on customer service and customer success, guiding people through a process. So all 6 of these topics that I've brought up in the crash course are fully accessible at this website here. Actually, I forgot a little dot here, so ZynBit.com. And let me just go ahead and I'm going to edit that real quick so we don't make a mistake. So it's at ZynBit.com right here, and it's under /webinars. And you have the capability to view that. You have a capability to download not only this webinar, because we're recording this webinar and that webinar recording will be up, but also our other 6 webinars that you'll have access to, where we really delve deep into all of those things that we talked about. So you'll know much more about prospecting, much more about Smarketing, much more about storytelling, much more about all of the topics we covered today. And then lastly, I'm always open to offer. Many of you, some of you may have taken these, but I do offer a Sales Hacker Mentor meeting. If you want to deep dive into one of these disciplines with me for 30 minutes, we'll take a look. We'll take a look at your story. We'll take a look at your Smarketing, your move to become a Smarketer. We'll take a look at some of your prospecting emails and see if they work. And if you go to my calendar, you can go ahead and access that. You can also go to my LinkedIn, because my LinkedIn has some reviews from some of the from some of the sales mentor sessions that I've done with people already, and that'll be a good it'll be a good explanation to you about how they feel, the information that they've been able to gather for that. But that's the crash course, and I know that's a lot of information. And I know I've been talking for 50 minutes, if not longer. So we'll go ahead and break and see exactly if people have any questions. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask me. If you're seeing this on the recording, you can feel free to go ahead and email me questions in regards to what you've seen, why I feel this way, and where you can get tools in order to go ahead and help you do these things. So with that, I'll go ahead and take a breath and be silent.
Thanks, Derek, for that crash course. Really appreciate that. We'll give everyone a few minutes to type in any questions that they may have, but one question that we had is, Derek, you being an individual who's been in the old normal and the new normal, what's the one thing that you have done differently that you think has given you the most success?
Great question. So the one thing, it's actually different. It's actually 2 things, but it's the one thing is that I have stopped making it about me. I really think that's what it is. I think that, I mean, even in this webinar, when you're listening and finding out information, what I'm communicating is about our customers, about what's going on with them out there. I used to succeed in sales at Xerox because I'd walk on the demo room floor and I'd demo a machine to a person, and I'd have it would be about what I needed to close this month, what I needed to sell this person, what I, right? That's exactly how I thought. My commission, my quota, whether or not I wanted to come to work tomorrow was dependent upon if I sold this guy or gal, if I signed the contract. It was all about me. Rarely did I ever care or ask questions about the customer. The customer was just a means to an end. I'm no longer afforded that opportunity. Customers are too savvy. They're not. There's too many choices out there. So I have to, if I want to succeed as a salesperson, I have to go ahead and communicate to them in a way where it is most important about them, and it's about them. And that doesn't mean I have to talk 20% of the time and the customer needs to talk 80% of the time or anything like that. What it means is, however percentage we're each talking, the communication always has to be about them. And I think that is primarily the biggest change I've seen from the old style selling to this new style selling.
That's great. So earlier in your presentation, you had showed an email template for prospecting, and an individual had asked if they could get a copy of that. And I just wanted the group to know that we actually have an infographic that we created off of that template specifically that we'd be glad to send to you following up from this session. So I think with that, that's all the questions we received, and we are definitely running out of time. So we've recorded this session. We'll make sure everyone gets a link, and please take some time to visit ZynBit.com/webinars to gain access to all of the different webinars within the Sales Hacker series. And want to thank Derek again for a great presentation today. Thanks for everyone that joined.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have yourself a wonderful day and happy selling.